Hello, welcome to MHTV. Really pleased to have you with us today. And we're going to be talking about a subject which is so important, I think, for all nurses to be aware of, but also to take to your hearts as well. So our title tonight is Courageous Wellbeing for Nurses, Strategies for Renewal. And I love it. I love its hopefulness and I love its positivity and its call to action. And I'm sure you're going to really want to get involved with what our guests are saying. But before we do that, let's go to Dave to tell people how they can join in, comment and interact.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. And it's a slightly different one tonight. We're actually recording this a week before putting this out as an episode. So you can absolutely still join in. The ways that you can do it, you can either post on the Facebook post that this video's on, or you can head over to X as you're watching it. And if you want to include any of our our Twitter X names, or use the hashtag MHTV, then we'll pick up those messages after the episode gets put out live. But without further ado, straight back to you, Nikki.
Fantastic. Let's come to our guests. So Donna, can you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, certainly, Nikki, I would love to. My name is Donna Gaffney, and I'm an advanced practice psych mental health nurse from Los Angeles, California, and also a psychotherapist. And I have been working with families, children, individuals my entire career, but over the past 4 years, I've been working very much with nurses who have been dealing with the ravages of the pandemic and how they are trying to put their lives back in order.
Fantastic. And Ed, hello.
Hi, thanks for having us on. So I'm Ed Lord. I'm a lecturer in mental health nursing at Swansea University. I've been a mental health nurse for 20 years this year. It's my 20th anniversary. So I've got a background in acute inpatient mental health services mostly, and I also did a PhD in looking at nature-based interventions. I'm really interested in what some people call ecotherapy. So that's me.
So tell us about what's going on. What brought you together? What's the nub of this problem?
Ed, I'm going to let you start with that because I think you are the one that sort of have put together the nature group, the group of us.
Yeah, so we started meeting as a group of nurses, essentially. It was kind of like, we're nurses with a common interest in nature and what nature means to us and what nature can do for the people that we're working with, what a powerful kind of thing it could be. At the time, I was doing my PhD, looking at ecotherapy, nature-based interventions and that kind of thing. But I think, as is often the case with people in that field, it's something that we're personally passionate about as well. Being someone who loves nature, feels very strongly about spending time there, about protecting the natural world and that kind of thing. And we got this kind of group together. It was someone else who can take credit for it. So a nurse in New York State originally kind of got us all together, was very good at networking. I don't want to take the credit for being an amazing networker. I do my best, but she was really good. And there was a whole load of us from all over the world. So we've been meeting on Zoom kind of ever since the pandemic started. It was one of those accidental things that was almost like a pro, that we're all suddenly communicating in this forum. And we had folks from, there was me from Wales, there was folks from Ireland and Portugal, and Canada, the USA, someone from Mexico. We had a whole load of different people, but they were all nurses, and that's kind of how me and Donna got talking and got networking. And as the kind of junior partner in that, in terms of expertise and that kind of thing, I often felt like I was standing on the shoulders of giants. Really, there were some fantastic people there that did me a lot of good. It was a really good experience, that, and it's just nice how we can come together, how we can find those connections. I think that's good. So is that your kind of take on it, Donna?
It absolutely is, Ed. And in fact, it was so appropriate for us to be meeting as we were all going through this pandemic.
Yeah.
And I began to do some work, a lot of work actually, with nurses here in the US. And webinars and workshops and pro bono therapy, group support group work. And I decided that I should begin to put all of this on paper. Didn't think that there would be, I knew there was a market for this, but I didn't think that there would be sort of this outcry of people saying, well, what can we do? What can we do? And there was a lot of talk about this self-care, and also a lot of talk, or a lot of responses from nurses who would roll their eyes and say, and when am I going to have time to do that? Yeah. But I've also been working with school nurses since the beginning of the pandemic. And I asked Ed and all of the people on this group call, actually, if they would like to be a part of a webinar for school nurses focusing on nature. So that was, I think, in September of 2020. And it was wonderful how everybody had a different part, and gardening, and talking about the essence of ecotherapy and how important it is. Yeah. And then when I wrote the book proposal, I knew that, excuse me, we had to have a chapter on ecotherapy and nature. So I immediately reached out to Ed and said, what needs to be in this chapter? And I also reached out to the other people in our group for their review and their take on the chapters. And so Johns Hopkins University Press wanted an international sort of take on well-being. And so I reached out to people in our group, and also they shared their stories and theirs for the group, and for the book rather. And Ed actually has his story in the book, which is so powerful, about how, living where he lives, which is, of course, the impetus of why I wanted to come to Wales, and how, nature really adds to your well-being. And it was especially powerful during the pandemic. So it's good anytime, but good for the really, really important for those of us struggling with the pandemic, whether healthcare or not. So, it was just a fortuitous coming together of these like-minded spirits.
It was an extraordinary time, wasn't it? And that's when we started, for the very same reasons. Everyone was cut off. Everybody was have to find new ways to connect to each other. So I think what you're describing is something which is so interesting and such an exciting, so sad and so difficult and so stressful. Right. But like all crisis-opportunities, both a crisis and an opportunity.
That's
so
right.
It was interesting.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so Ed, can we come back to you and say what was happening from your perspective then?
So yeah, it felt like a very busy, a very intense time. I was learning to be a lecturer. I was relatively new in post. I was still finding my way around. I was still working out what nurse education looked like from the other side of the kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Whilst it was changing underneath you at the same time.
Yeah, that's it. While we were working in these kind of new ways and not being able to interact with people directly, and the kind of stress coming through from students. I mean, like bless them, they were like they were right in the thick of it, and
terrifying.
What is this thing going on? What is this thing going on in the world? And it was, it was really quite an intense time in that kind of sense. And I think that's why I like Donna's work in this so much, and why I felt comfortable engaging with this project in such a way, because people talk about well-being in a really, really kind of cheap, neoliberal kind of way, in this awful kind of just be more resilient and on, and we don't care. And actually Donna stands out in not falling for that trick. Actually, she talks about well-being. She gives us a load of really concrete strategies throughout the book, and in the way she speaks, you can tell she actually works with people and she knows what they need. But it's the understanding that nurses are doing these really, really difficult things, and that really resonated with my experience of interacting with students and colleagues, and people going out and working in these settings
Mm.
and kind of feeling all of this kind of stress. So it was someone who could really resonate with that level of stress and could understand quite what an experience it was like. Yeah, I guess this idea, isn't it? It's this thing that keeps coming through, and I find this keeps coming through in my kind of teaching and in my life experience, this idea that we need practices to keep us well. We need things like that, but we don't just need the individual, do we? Or else it's just more effort for us to put in. We need to understand what is wrong with the systems that we're working in
100%.
and why are they putting us under so much pressure. So that idea that nurses kind of like should be self-sacrificing, that they should just suck it up, and they should just, because it's a vocation, and because all these different words that people use, it's beautiful. That's why we do it. It's an amazing job for that. But that doesn't mean that we should have a burnt out workforce, does it? So I really like the way that Donna kind of manages that balance. I think that works really well. So.
It's really interesting. We had a student on, not what we've just finished, but the one before, talking about nurses being called angels and saying how difficult it was because it really laid the groundwork for people to be undercared for and exploited. It's like, it's nice that you clap for me, but it's not nice that I am put at risk because I don't have PPE and I'm underpaid and I'm in a food bank. Because nurses don't need food, nurses don't need rest, nurses are angels. That's what's supposed to happen. And I think COVID really clarified a lot of the problems that had been building for a long time, probably since the 90s and before, around the way that nurses are spoken about and imagined, and then almost controlled to a certain extent. And the way that, if you think about, for me, Michael Trainor's work on critical resilience, it's like, you're not lacking in resilience if you're the only nurse on shift. That's not a flaw in your ability to cope with pressure. And, all the mindfulness and breathing exercises aren't going to magic up a full staff complement. So I think that stuff's really important for nurses to hear, particularly from other nurses. So I wonder, what you noticed about the kind of like the mental health and well-being of nurses who are supposed to be care experts. What do you think is happening in your local areas and globally? So perhaps we can come to Donna and then back to Ed for that.
Such a great question, Nikki. I learned from the nurses I listened to, because I was expecting them to say, because the media captured, pouring their hearts out, these difficult situations. But when I interviewed them, I came away with a different sort of reaction to them. That yes, they did have those struggles that they were dealing with, but they also really rose to the occasion. They recognized in themselves what they needed. So they were very self-aware. They were also practicing autonomy, even though hospital administrators might not have wanted them to. They were innovative, they were resourceful, they were learning, they found meaning and purpose, as Ed, has mentioned, just an incredible sense of who they are and why they're doing this incredibly difficult work. So as I looked at that, I kept thinking that this doesn't sound like the traditional, you're traumatized, you're burnt out, all of that one-sidedness, but there was something else going on. And I saw that they were really practicing well-being. And they felt, and as I read more about it, I kept thinking, what is the model? What's the model that I can use? And I found Dr. Carol Riff's work on psychological well-being to be the most accurate way of portraying well-being, and how the nurses really responded, that they were self-aware, practicing self-compassion, or needed to practice more self-compassion, and autonomous, learning, growing, connecting with each other, which was really powerful during the pandemic. And that really became sort of the essence of how I wanted to really regroup and see how they could practice and take care of themselves. you know, I had so many of them say, don't tell me to go to my yoga class. Don't tell me to do my breath work, because as you mentioned, that's not going to bring the staff numbers.
Yeah.
And the other part that was so important is that they spoke up. They really became advocates and activists for each other. Now, there were people who tried to silence them, but
100%.
but that didn't work. And so that's why I think hearing voices of other nurses and how they practice and what they did to make a difference in themselves. And yes, don't call me a hero. Don't call me an angel. In fact, don't say this is a calling. Although there's, you know, lots of controversy on whether to use that word or not. But the fact is that they, by putting them on this pedestal of you, oh, you're doing that really hard work. I could never do that. But in fact, you know, we can all do this very difficult work. It takes education and support and training and clinical skills. But it also puts them very separate from the rest of us. They're not human, and they are human. And one of the things that I didn't write about in the book, but I've really come to appreciate, is this whole idea of meaningful work and mattering. That doing work that has purpose and has meaning is so important for all of us, no matter what, whether it's teaching or nursing or any kind of profession. If we can find meaning, but we have to be careful that it's a double-edged sword, and that is that our boundaries begin to get fuzzy. Well, certainly you'll want to work overtime because this is such important work. You would do this for free. So, and of course, that's nothing could be further than the truth, but it really began to have an effect on people. And we had this boundary erosion that you couldn't draw that line in the sand. You needed to say, well, it's important to cover the shift, but I've been working X number of days in a row. This is not good for me. And nurses want to feel that they matter. We need to hear people say, and thank you, Dr. Ed Lord, for your incredible dissertation and the work that you're doing, and to promote that, and not just simply say, oh, I heard from so-and-so and so-and-so that you did a great job in such and such. We really have to point out how nurses matter, because some of the research that's been done on mattering is if we don't matter, then we are not going to stay. We're going to be burnt out.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting how this thing has changed across time, and also comparing our two different contexts. There's often seen this kind of binary difference, isn't there, between the US healthcare system and the kind of UK healthcare system, and each kind of have stereotypical notions of what goes on in each kind of setting, and also kind of the idea of over time. So I said I kind of started training. I qualified kind of 20 years ago, and at the time it felt like there was a lot of resources going into mental health. There was a lot of stuff in the late noughties. It was a different government in power, for starters, in the UK. Things felt like they were well funded. I felt like I was going into a service, and the staffing was improving year on year in the trust that I was working in Nottingham. It felt like things were things were good. People were innovating. There were really good stuff. We were talking about the recovery model, and we were thinking, how can we innovate and how can we do this thing? And I've just noticed since 2010, and then kind of the pandemic is kind of like the icing on top. It's just been like, this thing has been getting harder and harder year on year, hasn't it? Kind of incrementally.
Feels more mechanized, I think, than it ever did before. There seemed to be more creativity and space to be therapeutic, whereas now it seems a lot more systematized, which is not in itself a terrible thing, except for when it's going to the lowest common denominator all the time. And the measurement is how quickly do we see people, not are they better after we've seen them?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
Have we helped them to feel happier or more connected? Or So
then it feels hard being a nurse educator, because you feel like you're preparing people for this this working environment, there's
Mm.
such a difference, isn't there, between what you're telling them and what you're educating them and the reality of the working life.
Yeah.
It's just nice to think that we could find some hope and we could find ways to change these things, isn't it, to make these things better in the future. And from the conversations I've had with Donna, I mean, the situation in the States seems incredibly similar. So kind of nurses not being able to innovate and not being able to do what they want to do and not being able to kind of practice in this way, you know, it's like the idea that we can have solidarity, can't we? Like across
I love that.
borders, we can be like, we're global nurses, aren't we? We're facing the same kind of challenges, aren't we? And
yeah.
like
Do you think there's something particular about, and this is to anybody who wants to answer it, do you think there's something particular about the kind of nature of nurses that makes them susceptible to this kind of, not grooming, but kind of like taking on board this extra responsibility for outpay? Because you don't see doctors doing it. You don't see midwives doing it, particularly social workers. There's something, it seems, about nursing that we kind of susceptible to flattery or needing to believe we're doing something no one else can do. You know, you come across those nurses who say things like, I haven't even had time to go to the loo in a 10-hour shift. And you're like, you getting some kind of horrible infection isn't going to help anybody. Go for it, it's fine. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, in the beginning of the pandemic, I really thought that that this was primarily a nursing issue because the nurses were, I mean, we heard them speaking on social media and in interviews about things that I've never heard nurses talk about out loud and really enraged. But then I began to work with social workers and physicians, and they were going through the same thing. Now, I don't know for, you know, about the UK, but here in the States, I've become involved with several groups of physicians and nurses, people who are starting their own grassroots organizations because they're tired of waiting for other people to fix things for them. They're just going to move forward and fix this. It's just been quite remarkable. So I think that because we see more nurses, maybe than physicians or social workers, we hear about it more. But truly, what I have heard is that it's all healthcare professionals. And I've also heard from teachers that they are also struggling. So I think that, I don't know, Ed, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there does seem to be a certain set of common challenges, doesn't there? I've noticed there is this thing where we have a habit of kind of disciplining each other, almost like really, I don't know, it's hard to put in words in a constructive way, but almost like this idea that it's whether it's the nature of the institutions we work in or that kind of thing, but we kind of hold each other to account. We keep each other in line, whether there's, I don't know, is it something with being like a mass profession because that we are a mass, there's a lot of us, and it's almost like that regimentation or like, I don't know what it is. There's just something in the culture.
It can be honest.
And it's a cultural thing, I think, isn't it? With kind of nursing, this idea that heck, we need to discipline these people and kind of make sure they're all in line, and this is how we run the service. You get told all the time, don't you, that it's the needs of the service, of the service, and that's kind of like the bottom line, isn't it? And it's there's more to it than that, isn't there? There's qualitatively more to the working life and the services we're running than that basic level. So,
and also, we're not here for the service, we're here for the service users. And that's what's really interesting. How do we get into that old trap?
Yeah, that's true. It's all just about
we're here for the sausage factory. No. But I love the idea of what you're saying, because I've seen it and I've experienced it. And I think sometimes I've even had the urge to like police colleagues. And if that energy is actually moved into supporting, encouraging, disrupting, actually recognizing each other's power, that's such an amazingly strong force for change. It's really exciting.
It really is. And I've been working with several colleagues in Canada, and And we were talking about, well, what can we offer? And he really believes in the model of design thinking, where you co-create. And so we said, we're not going to go to the hospitals. That was not going to work at all. Yeah. Because the last thing they want is for nurses to have a louder voice, or any healthcare professional to have a louder voice. So we thought, there's this group of young movers and shakers and change makers who have started these organizations. Let's align with them. And so we did, and we reached out to them and said, all right, we hear you, we see you, we know what you're trying to accomplish. What do you need from us? We will provide whatever resources, we'll provide the content, and however you want to use it. And they have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. They know how to use social media. They talk to each other about what they need. And it's been quite extraordinary to see how they are really understanding what it means to take care of yourself and put yourself first. They have a whole merch line where one of the t-shirts says on the front is, I can't take care of you without taking care of me. And I thought,
love
okay,
that. Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Dave's looking to get in on the conversation. He's blowing on my WhatsApp. So
let me in.
Go on,
yeah.
go for it.
Well, the first really sort of quick question was, is kind of like, would you say that a self-help book, is that like a pejorative term, or would you say that what you've written is a self-help book?
I cringe when I hear the word self-care, self-help. I know that the bookstores would like to categorize this as a self-help book. And if you take it in the purest sense of the word, it is about what you could do for yourself, but it's also about how you can find community. Yeah. Because we know that the collective well-being is so supportive of the individual well-being. So I like to think of it in terms of a goal, and that is, my goal is well-being. My goal is to be the best person that I can be, the best life that I can have. Not the goal to be happy, but to be really satisfied with who I am and what I'm doing. And that's what is in the book. It's not only about traditional methods of well-being practices, finding those yoga, mindfulness, all of those are well-researched and very, very helpful. But it's also about a whole chapter on nature. How do you find yourself in nature? What can you do? And all the research that supports that. It's also about the arts and how writing and painting is very, very helpful in terms of promoting your own mental health and well-being. It's about activism and advocacy. All of those things really, there are some chapters on food and sleep. My co-author wrote those because she's the expert in those areas. But it's more, it's sort of the whole picture of who you are as a person. And then the final chapter in the book is, so you want to go further. How do you find a therapist? What do you look for? And if you are not finding the experience helpful, what do you do? How do you change that? And do something that really is going to benefit you.
Okay. And then the next question was, I suppose it's hard to ask the question without saying a self-help book, but why would a nurse be more interested in this book that's focused on nursing than, say, a generic book that hasn't got that focus on nursing? What have you kind of teased out of the text to kind of focus it more towards the nurses?
Well, that's a great question. And the reason why it's such a good question is because people have said to me, why did you write this just for nurses? I need this book. And so my intent was, and my publisher actually had a lot to do with it. He said, you know, this is the group of people that really needs your help right now.
Mm.
So, and the stories are nurses' stories, but I have talked to so many people who have said, well, there isn't anything specific to nurses in here. This is for all of us to do this. So, sometimes I feel like I should put a cover over it, another cover, and say, courageous well-being for nurses, cross that out, and the rest of us. So,
but then there's some things I could pick up there. So the little story that I've got included in it. So Donna said, Ed, can you write one of these pieces? And I thought to when I was doing shifts, which isn't all that long ago, on the acute ward, 7 o'clock start in the morning, clock in, clock out again at like, I think we used to finish at like 2:30, 2:45, that kind of thing. So you do an early shift. But I needed to be at the school gate to pick up my two boys by like 3:20 or 3:15 and that kind of thing. And that's kind of like the realities of a working life, isn't it? And the whole bit I wrote is literally about the cycle ride to work. So I would cycle, I would get on my bike and ride like a bat out of hell to get to the school gate on time to pick up the kids. And it's this idea that you're kind of squashing this thing in, aren't you? Your life is like this whole load of like things, and how do you fit in the well-being between them? And I loved my bike ride. I absolutely loved it, and it was fantastic. The inpatient units in mental health units in Swansea are at the top of a really, really high hill. They're really high. It's one of the highest points in Swansea. The views are beautiful. If you're thinking about ecotherapy and that kind of thing, this place is stunning. The Victorians built it. It's an old asylum, but the views are mind-blowing. I couldn't believe it when I got a job there. But the cycle ride there, it's like, it's a big hill, you know. But I learned to love this thing and to really get a lot out of that. And that's how you fit in well-being. There aren't, I don't know, it's this interesting difference between like what I like to call like clock in, clock out jobs when you're on the clock, isn't it? And jobs where you've got a little bit of flexibility and you can fit in your well-being around your kind of thing. And that kind of nursing is very much a clock in, clock out job, isn't it? And in that sense, it isn't all that different to kind of working in a fast food restaurant or that kind of thing, in terms of you've got to be there on the clock, you've got to be there, and then how do you fit in your well-being around that and the other pressures of life? So the bit I wrote kind of summed up one of those kind of challenges, I guess. And that idea that you should stay late, shouldn't you? Like about responsibility in life and that kind of thing. Because if there's something happening on the ward, it's really hard to leave, isn't it? But then you're like, there's two minors that need my care there. It's like the second shift, isn't it? It's like, I'm here, this place needs me, and these people need me, and I'm torn between the two. And I'm going to have to walk out of this shift. I'm going to have to leave on time because I have responsibilities. And that's the bottom line, isn't it? That is the bottom line. We have lives, don't we? It isn't like on Call the Midwife. Do you know the TV program Call the Midwife, Donna? Do you have that in America?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that idea. And they're all just living it, aren't they? They don't have other caring responsibilities. They're literally living the nursing job, aren't they? They're in a total institution, essentially. And our nursing jobs just aren't like that anymore, are they? That just isn't how it functions. We have lives, don't we? We have responsibilities. So I was trying to capture some of that, I guess, in the little bit that
Ed's piece is just beautiful. And then he sent me a photo of this amazing view, and just being able to look in the distance is so grounding, so that you really have this, you're exercising, you're looking ahead at this incredible view, and it's all for you. There's nothing else going on. This is your moment. But then I think it's so important, Ed, what you said about boundaries. And that's what begins to be eroded when we think we're in this incredible, responsible role that no one else can do what we're doing. And so we have to be better at setting those boundaries.
It's flattering, isn't it, to believe you're indispensable?
Oh, yeah.
If anything happens to you,
Yeah.
there'll be an agency nurse there tomorrow. So
Yeah.
it's really important
Right.
to remember that. I think one of the things that Ed was saying really kind of remind me is how we're rediscovering things all the time as well. So when Victorians built those spaces, they understood human beings need light, space, clean air, access to horticulture, access to the whole human being to be well. And then somehow we've got ourselves in a situation, we're in inner cities, we've got inpatient wards that are 5 stories up with no staff to take anybody outside. And you're like, oh no, I just don't understand how we came back round in the circle again.
Definitely, yeah. They end up incredibly soulless, don't they? So there's this whole debate that we've been having in mental health services for decades, isn't there? Like the crumbling asylums and kind of buildings that aren't fit for purpose. And we've all worked in them, haven't we? But we've also worked on new units, and they don't really solve the problem, do they? Exactly like you're saying there, Nikki. There's something that we've lost almost, isn't there, in terms of the setting and the kind of space. I wrote in my thesis there was a little bit about someone had done some really interesting archival research about what's the original place in York, the Retreat, so the kind of Quaker kind of thing there, and how it was all about nature and obviously staff spending time in nature with patients, that kind of thing. And I think about some of the times when I worked in Nottingham. I remember I worked on one of the acute wards there, and not all that far away there was this lovely park, Woollerton Park, and if someone had enough section 17 leave and there was enough staff, you'd be able to go for a walk with someone, and you'd end up in this park, and you'd be sitting by trees, and you'd have the therapeutic interaction changes, doesn't it? The power thing kind of gets a bit shaken up in that situation, isn't there? And there's definitely
people.
Those things are rare, aren't they? Those things are really hard to capture. There's not enough time to do that stuff, and the locations that we're in don't enable that, really, do they? But yeah.
I think what's really exciting about this book is it's almost like a way of thinking about how we've all got atomized and how to bring your whole self back together again. Because we're rewarded for chopping ourselves up. As you were saying, you're this person here and that person there. And also we know instinctively what helps other people heal. We're always talking about sleep hygiene and nutrition with service users and people who we're supporting, and then eating like a packet of Monster Munch and not sleeping. I don't know how anyone takes our health advice seriously, honestly. We've got orange dust everywhere. It's not a good look. So there is you can intellectually, I was like Dave was saying, now why is it for nurses? But I think sometimes we exceptionalize ourselves as well as, so like this is what a human being needs, but I'm not like, I'm a nurse. I don't get sick. I don't feel stress. I don't get sad. And I think we can almost believe our own hype almost, instead of thinking we all humans need this. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's the number one thing that we have to address, that we are human beings first. And because we're a nurse or a physician or a social worker or a teacher doesn't give us sort of the ability to be the superhuman, that we have to recognize that we are prone to all of the same issues and challenges that other people are. And I think there was a lot of that. And I think a lot of it, and Ed, you can speak to this better. I think it happens in education that we don't, that very first, just to give you an example, when I was a very young student nurse a long, long time ago, my grandmother was very sick and had an aortic aneurysm and died post surgery. So in this crazy confluence of events, I didn't take time off from school, went right back in, and guess who the patient my instructor assigned to me? A person with an aortic aneurysm. And I felt I couldn't say anything like, this is not a good day for me to be doing this. And she didn't want to hear it either. So I think that we need to let students know early on, and I'm so looking forward to talking to ed students in a couple of weeks, but we need to tell them about the double-edged sword of this compassionate work that we do. That it's very easy to just not see ourselves and the needs that we have and the boundaries that we need to hold dear to us. And if we can begin to do that, if we can begin to say, okay, I'm in a profession that I'm going to be at risk for, list all the things. So therefore, I need to really make sure that I take good care of myself. I think if we started that early on, and not just with healthcare professionals, but with teachers and in a number of different positions. And by the way, the first group of people that were studied to look at this whole issue of meaningful work and mattering were zookeepers. The zookeeper said, I am the only one that can take care of these endangered animals. And I love my job so much, I would do this for free. Well, then that you become sort of a victim of other people who may not intentionally take advantage of you, but it happens. So I think we talk about this from day one in a health professional program to the day they graduate, and then after that.
From an education point of view, I've very much come to learn over the past few years as I've been finding my way around lecturing. Actually, we don't talk enough about well-being. I'll sometimes say to a student, to a kind of group of students, especially first years when they're first to it, and you're trying to give a very general introduction to kind of mental health or something like that, you'll ask them, like, what does it look like if somebody's thriving? If someone, like, we've got such a poverty of thought in terms of how we can thrive as humans. We're not used to that kind of positive view of well-being. I think they expect me to go in there and start talking about psychopathology and kind of diagnoses and what's depression and what's this and what's that. And actually, you almost need to flip the coin and say, look, how can you thrive? Have a go at working out what other parts of your life mean you don't thrive. And, you know, you can look at intersectional characteristics and living in a patriarchal society, and you can think about poverty and inequality, and you can talk about a whole load of things like that. What are the things that are stopping you thriving? And then once you've worked that out, you may be in a position where you can help other people to thrive, to then like your knowing yourself almost comes first. I like that whole thing in kind of like some schools of psychotherapy where you engage in psychotherapy yourself, don't you, when you're doing your training and all that kind of thing. And like I almost feel like nurses should do that in our training, not psychotherapy necessarily, but like well-being practices, like thriving. How can we thrive? How can we understand what's stopping us thriving? And yes, that's just something I've kind of picked up.
I can see we're racing through this time-wise. We're getting a bit ahead of us. Let's come to Dave and see if there's anything that you wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, I suppose one was an observation, and it's that bit about, you know, you've talked about the real value we need to place in things to support with well-being. I suppose one of the observations I've got is how, you know, through austerity, you know, the first version of it and the new version of it, that actually those are the things that are being cut. And it's fascinating as with, you know, the government that we've got at the moment doing that, and then also kind of saying, oh yeah, and we're going to take benefits away from people who've got mental health problems, because obviously they've not really got mental health problems. It's just, you know, they're a bit sad and they can't get a job. But we're going to make it harder for people to get a job, and we're going to make them really depressed because of all the kind of pressure we put on them. So I think that whole prism is really interesting, and hopefully it will be changed when we've got a change of government. You know, high hopes that will happen. I suppose there could be a question about, is that a similar situation in America? But maybe that's a completely different episode of MHTV, and we need to get you back on, Donna, when you're back home to ask you those questions. But I think the question that I did want to ask about the work that you've done and the book that you've produced. Over the last few episodes, we kind of threaded through a few of these issues, and one of them that's come out for us is how revisioning distress and nurse suicidality through a feminist critical suicidology lens. So that kind of bit about how much is your book a book around feminism, and that this is an issue for women much more than it is for men, or is that just not a feature of the book?
I think Ed would also be a good person to sort of address this question. I did not intend it to be a book about feminism or through a feminist lens, although I think we have to acknowledge that that we still have women in the role of nurses far more than men. I was very, very clear that I wanted some of the people who told their stories in the book to be men. So there's four men in the book. They dealt with many of the same things that all of the other nurses were dealing with. And I think that maybe it's in the back of our minds because I was socialized into nursing when it was still very, very predominant women's role. So I think that, but none of the supporting research on any of the strategies are based on women. So I think, but Ed, I'm going to let you answer that as well.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, isn't it? So by logic of us still living in a patriarchal society and nursing being a majority female profession, then that is why it's subjugated in so many ways, isn't it? Essentially, and it's well documented, isn't it? How kind of positions of leadership and this kind of thing are, people are held back, aren't they? There's a ceiling there, isn't there? And that speaks to so much about nursing, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose just to say, really glad personally to be involved in the research that the Wellcome Trust is funding, and that's not just focused on the UK. It's going to be a global piece of research. So, Donna, if you've not kind of got involved in that, maybe it's something to to kind of keep an eye on, because hopefully it's really going to do some sort of ground landmark work in this area. So yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
Because we're getting towards the end, if we can start to think about if there's anything that particularly helps each one of us. I mean, for me, when I had long COVID, I've always been a massively keen gardener, and being outside was what changed it for me. When I couldn't really talk, I couldn't really walk, being outside in nature and seeing things growing and changing, and being outside London for the first time in a long time, that really helped me. And I think, and also, to be honest, COVID, with all its sadness, it disrupted my very unhealthy work ethic, which was totally instilled by the NHS and continued onwards. And it made me really reprioritize how I worked and where I put my energy. And it made me value it. When I had to work for it to get the energy to do things, I had to be really careful how I spent it. And I changed my priorities completely. So I think being in nature, being around, kind of watching seasonal changes for the first time in a long time, that made a difference to me. And I think a lot of people started gardening in lockdown because that was the only thing that was open in the UK. Like a garden centre was it. And I think a lot of people started to value being outside in a way that perhaps they hadn't when they were task focused. And I wonder, for you guys, where do you find your nourishment, your recovery?
Well, I'll go first, and I know where Ed's going to go with with this. I love the arts. I find music and the arts so calming for me, and I can get lost in what I'm listening to, and it's especially good if I'm walking with headphones on at the same time listening. As a matter of fact, as I worked on over the 3 years I worked on the book, I created a playlist. And every time I would start playing the music, it would bring me to a place where I could be more productive, and it was calming for me. So that's my secret sauce.
Secret sauce, Ed.
I love cycling, and I just never get any time to do it. I would really love it. I've actually got myself into a lot of very unhealthy practices. Actually, I find having researched nature and nature connection, I feel like I've overdone it a bit. I feel like it's almost lost something of that for me, which is actually making me really depressed at the moment. It's actually making me really sad at the moment, because actually I love nature, but I'm thinking, I think I'm overthinking nature. So actually I would really like to reconnect in the way that in the way that I used to. And that's an important thing that I'm still working on, I think. So yeah.
That can really easily happen when you make your hobby or your joy your work.
Yeah.
It changes it. And I don't know anybody who's picked their favorite topic to be a PhD who hasn't come through the end of it absolutely livid with the topic.
Yeah, that's probably
time is women's well-being.
Yeah, that's great.
Dave, what's your secret sauce?
It's been fascinating kind of listen to the things that each of you's described, because I kind of think, oh yeah, I'll have a bit of that. Oh, I'll have a bit of that. So it's been funny for that. One of the things that I do feel a bit guilty about is that I know for some, the COVID pandemic was the worst time of people's lives. But actually for me to reflect, it brought about some of the best things for me. That, you know, I was spending before COVID so much time away from my family. You know, that completely changed. You know, it was that I was sort of in the house and the children were in the house 24/7. So I got to see my family more than I'd ever got to see them before. I was lucky. I know, Nikki, at the time you kind of had the window box and that was about it for the nature. I had a great big, you know, garden to lie in on the hottest summer that we kind of remembered and all that kind of stuff. You know, the Pennines are just outside, you know, my window there. So we were kind of spending every weekend going for long walks in the hills and everything. And so much of that has fallen by the wayside because of the pace of life having returned. And there is a bit of me that really wishes, not for a new global pandemic, but for
you heard it here first.
elements of that to come back. And also in terms of, you know, it meant I could get back into nursing, you know, being in the vaccination centre, all that kind of stuff. There's so many kind of positives that gave. But I suppose if I had to give a much quicker answer, I'd say travel, that I absolutely love travelling with my family. And, you know, it gives such kind of so many elements to it that I really, really enjoy. So I've kind of replaced work travel with family travel, and I think that's been a real benefit for me, although I am a lot poorer now, which is obviously a bit of a problem.
Swings and roundabouts.
That's great.
So to finish up, what one thing, Donna, would you like people to take from your work? And then we'll come to Ed and Dave as well.
I think that prioritizing yourself and practicing self-compassion is the starting point. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Ed?
Yeah, so I just on a super practical level, I just want to really emphasize to the students that that Donna's going to be engaging with. So she's going to be at Roehampton, she's going to be at UE, and she's going to be at Swansea. I want you all, if anybody's listening to this, to really kind of tap that resource, because Donna's coming to the UK all the way from the States, and she's doing these things, and you're really, really lucky to have her here. Kind of working with you, so I think that's a great thing. And she is also sorting out an event for the public in Pembrokeshire with a good friend of ours, Susie Tarrant. So watch our social media feeds for links to that. So if anybody is out in West Wales, the general public can meet Donna as well. So
that'd be great. Thank you, Ed.
Lovely. That's exciting. Dave, is there anything you wanted to say before we finish tonight?
I suppose I've not had a chance to read Donna's full book, but I have kind of had a quick glance through some bits, and I think the dedication's really nice. So I would kind of say, you know, to anyone out there listening tonight, a bit of homework, head over to the website for the book, have a read of the dedication, and then maybe think about reading a bit further.
Absolutely. And that's a really great way for us to finish up tonight. And just to thank so much our guests, Donna and Ed, for absolutely recentering nurse wellbeing, because we can't do anything until that's sorted out. And it's so important. So please do take the opportunities to value and nurture and celebrate yourselves and each other. It's really fantastic conversation to have had. Thank you very much. We've got a week's break, and then we're back with colleagues from Devon Partnership Trust talking about safer suicide and managing sort of well-being and making sure that people are secure and as safe as possible in that kind of really wholesome and therapeutic way. So that's something for us to look forward to. And thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Nikki and Dave, for your important work, and Ed for being such a great colleague.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
No.